and welcome to our reading skill for today. We've been looking at folk tales, and those are stories that are told that are passed down through time. We learned about fairy tales that talk about a time long ago. They normally have royalty, kings, queens, princesses, and they start with once upon a time and end with happily ever after. Some examples we looked at were Cinderella and Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. We also looked at fables. Fables have animals with human characteristics, so maybe they can talk. And they're also normally long ago. They normally teach us a lesson or a moral. And we looked at the fox and the grapes. Now let's go ahead, and today we're going to be looking at tall tales. Now, tall tales have superhuman abilities, and they may be based on a real person. So this might be about a historical character. So the characters might have superhuman qualities. Go ahead and type that out. Pause the video if you need more time to type. The setting in a tall tale may or may not be a historical time. May or may not have a historical basis. May or may not have a historical basis, meaning that it took place at a time in history. Some characteristics of a tall tale is that the humans are normally larger than life, not meaning that they are necessarily tall. Sometimes they do, but they're just over-exaggerated. Larger than life. Exaggeration, and they can be funny. They can be humorous. Now, one example that we're going to look at today is Paul Bunyan. Paul Bunyan. Once you have this typed out, let's move on to the next page. You can pause the video now if you need more time. So remember, tall tales, they can be based on a historical person or event. And Paul Bunyan is a character that was in the United States history, well known in the United States history. Maybe your family has someone in your tall tales that is different, but is historical for your family. And the characters or events are exaggerated. So let's go ahead and read about Paul Bunyan. When Paul was a baby, he was delivered to his parents by 6 giant storks. Well, I already know that this is a fictional story. It is exaggerated. And think about 6. He's probably really heavy. He was already 6 feet tall the day he was given to them. For breakfast, Paul would eat 20 stacks of pancakes, 5 pounds of bacon, and he'd drink 3 gallons of milk. And that was just his first meal of the day. Paul grew several feet each week. Soon he was too big to live indoors, so he went off to explore the great outdoors. For this first paragraph, we're going to highlight some of those exaggerated characteristics. 20 stacks of pancakes. I think someone would get sick if they ate that. 5 pounds of bacon and 3 gallons of milk. And I also don't think he was 6 feet tall the day he was born. Let's move on to the second one. Make sure you have those highlighted. One winter, Paul found a giant blue ox. Well, ox are not blue. That's an exaggeration. He named her Babe. The two became best friends and were always together from that day on. Paul became the best lumberjack who ever lived. He could chop down an entire forest with just one swing of his mighty axe. He cleared a way from east to west with Babe by his side and his axe in his hand. As Paul Bunyan traveled across the country, he left his mark along the way. While in Minnesota, his footsteps created the 10,000 links. That's another exaggeration, that his footsteps made lakes. In Arizona, his mighty ox dragged behind him, creating the Grand Canyon. One day, while trekking through Oregon, Paul put out his campfire while using a pile of rocks. This pile of rocks became known as mountain, called Mount Hood. If it were for Paul Bunyan, the land in the United States would look much different. He made the land so beautiful. Now, if you go to places like Minnesota, I'm not sure if Arizona has one, but I've seen one in Minnesota, they have a statue of Paul Bunyan that is super, super tall. See how tall he is compared to this little girl? In the stories that are passed down, that's how big they see him. And there is his giant blue ox. Looking at more tall tales and following lessons, but remember, tall tales are based on historical factors normally, and they have exaggerated characteristics. Paul Bunyan was probably tall, but he probably wasn't as tall as they're saying in here. Go ahead and make sure you have all of these parts highlighted, and you can move on to the next activity for today.